The webinar is now live. Looking forward to seeing the attendees come through. Welcome everybody to the webinar this afternoon. We will kick off very shortly. We want to make sure that we've got as much time so that you can hear these wonderful speakers and what they have to offer. So we will be kicking off very soon. So it's now 1 o'clock. So let's get going. So again, big welcome to all of you. I know you've come from near and far. Great to see the variety of people we've got online, so thank you. So we're going to be looking at gaining visibility and control of workplace wellbeing within health. So there's going to be some good questions that come up here, I know, and certainly the content is only going to be the tip of the iceberg, but I really would love you to have some questions coming through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the housekeeping first. So before I do that, I'm Janet Langley, I'm from Team Gauge, and I'm so grateful to be hosting this webinar today. We do have some amazing speakers, and I've already seen the content, so I'm sure you're going to get a lot from it. So with regard to the housekeeping, you can use your Q&A. So keep the questions coming through all through the webinar, but I will save the questions until the end when we get to the panel discussions. So as they pop into your mind, pop the questions in the Q&A. We'll also be using the chat. I know the speakers will be asking for your interaction, so feel free to use the chat to respond to the speakers. But other than that, keep the questions coming in. We may not get a chance to go through every question in the panel, so be assured that any questions you do ask will be referred to the panel afterwards, and we will have some answers for you to follow up with. So keep those questions coming in. So what's on the agenda? So we'll talk a little bit about what we're talking about today, and then I'm going to hand straight over to the speakers one at a time, and then we'll be doing a panel conversation. So, and as I said, the 10 minutes that these guys have got to speak is only the tip of the iceberg, so I know you're going to have some questions. So what are we doing today? We are focusing on the health workforce. We're well in over a year into this pandemic. We have seen the highs and lows. Some people have gone okay with it and other people haven't. Certainly in the health industry, there's been a lot of pressure, a lot of concerns, anxiety. So what we want to look at today is how can we help the health sector from a leadership perspective and also from an individual perspective. So it's great to see so many of you on board, obviously looking to find out some information and hopefully some shares to share some as well. So we want to look at how well we're equipped to support and encourage and help the well-being of everybody that works in the health sector. If you're not from the health sector, I know there's a few people that aren't, there will still be some wonderful nuggets of information that you can take away for your teams and your individuals as well. So we also want to touch on what we can do as individuals and what we can do from an organisational perspective. So we may be looking at what's worked and maybe what hasn't worked. We might be brave enough to go there. So we want it to be a safe place to try different things, but also not to the detriment of our people. So let's kick off. I will kick off. Maybe. Right, this is me, but you don't really want to see much about me. Let's go straight to our panel speakers. So we do have Tanya Lehman with us. And when I first met Tanya, I was blown away by the amount of knowledge and experience she had in the health industry. So certainly it'll be a pleasure to hear everything that Tanya's got to say in the 10 minutes that I'm going to let her speak for. We also have Rebecca Graham. So Rebecca's in the thick of things from a leadership perspective and an individual perspective, being the CEO of the Barossa Fleurieu local health network. And then we have Sue Langley, the CEO of the Langley Group and academic director of the Langley Group Institute. Yes, if you've recognised the similar last name, we are sisters. I'm going to put it right out there at the beginning. We have worked together for 7 years, and I am biased, of course, but Sue is on this panel because she is an expert in this field. She's globally renowned for her work in positive psychology and wellbeing, and she'll be sharing a lot of that with you today. So let's move straight to Tanya. So I'm going to hand over fairly quickly to you, Tanya, but I would like to go through your short bio. So I will have a look, I will read through that because you've got so much experience. I don't want to miss out on things here. So I'd like to introduce you, Tanya. You've got over 20 years experience leading large-scale organisation and systems change within the rural health and aged care sectors nationally. A clinician by background, experienced project manager, executive director, board chair, coach, mentor, trainer, and leadership program facilitator. You've got a lot of work on your plate. So since January 2021, Tanya's been full-time as a consultant in her own business, Aurora Meloria. I hope I've said that right. Meloria. I'll let you say that. I had it right before I started. I'm so sorry. Aurora Meliora Pty Limited, and as an associate with Culture Alchemy, Peak Global, Leadership HP, and Board Accord. So really specialising in culture change, leadership development, strategic alignment, and certainly getting really, I like this bit, really excited about co-adventuring with boards, directors, leaders, dancing on the edge of what's known, provoking fresh thinking and new perspectives to deliver breakthrough performance results. Fantastic. And I know you've got a really eye-opening story for us today. So I'm going to hand over to you. And as I said before, feel free to pop some questions in the Q&A and we'll answer those later on. So thanks, Tanya. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Janet. And thanks everyone for linking in today to be part of this really important conversation. I'm very passionate about it, so I'm going to make Janet work hard as a facilitator to keep you to my 10 minutes. So let's keep hoping. But as Janet said, I've actually been working in the South Australian health system mostly for the last 23 years in a range of roles from clinician, change leader through to, executive positions. And what I've come to believe really clearly is that the wellbeing of our people, the people who provide care, their wellbeing is directly related to the quality of the care that we can provide to our communities. And so really investing in, paying attention to, and making sure we're doing all that we can to promote the best possible wellbeing for our staff is really, really vital. So I want to talk about the canary in the coal mine. You've all heard the metaphor, I'm sure. And I've come to think about this metaphor of the canary as really a helpful way to help us to understand what's been going on, in particular the impacts of COVID. So what can canaries teach us about workplace wellbeing? So I want to introduce you to Sully. He's a thriving canary. He loves to sing and he's got a really important job. And his job is to keep the miners safe. So you would all know that, particularly in the UK coal mining industry, but across the planet, became pretty common practice for miners to take canaries with them into the mine shaft. And they did this, and the canaries were chosen specifically for their high metabolic rate, their cheery disposition, but also their sensitivity to carbon monoxide. And they effectively were a pre-technology early warning system. So when the canaries started to droop, when they started to labour over their breathing and ultimately die, it was a really good indication that the humans needed to get out of the coal mine. Otherwise they would labour over their breathing, get headaches, dizziness, and very quickly die from carbon monoxide poisoning. So pretty self-sacrificial kind of job for Mr. Canary, but really important one for us to understand what does it take to thrive. And so when a canary is healthy, they are really connected to their community. They feel like they belong. They also have this real sense of competence. They know what their job is and they know how to do it well. And thirdly, they have autonomy. They have control over their lives to an extent they can make choices. And that's what a thriving canary looks like. And by extension, what a thriving human in any industry looks like is like our mate Sunny, the canary, who feels like he belongs, he feels competent, and he feels in control of his environment. Unfortunately, when the environment and other conditions shift, we can go from thriving to striving. And what I have witnessed in health leaders and in myself and many of my friends and colleagues over particularly the impact of COVID is that we move out of this thriving space into striving, where we're much more reactive. We're much more inclined to be head down, soldier on, and not notice so much around us. We begin to question whether we belong or we fit in. We get messages that we're not good enough. Secondly, we begin to question our competence. I don't know what to do. I'm struggling with this. There's too much to do and I can't cope. But also we sense the sense of less reduction in our sense of self-efficacy or control. And this feeling that there's too much to do, I can't do it, and starting to feel like the problem is bigger than us. If that state goes on prolonged, it then becomes the next stage, which is this pretty critical state in their well-being of our canary, which is barely surviving, laboured breathing, you know, and from a human perspective, this looks like emotional exhaustion. It looks like depersonalization. So we lose our ability to care and be compassionate and depersonalize things. We end up focusing more and more on tasks and less on humans and people. And this third element is reduced professional efficacy. So we feel like we've cared too much for too long. What happens is about chasing tasks and getting stuff done. And we lose the sense of our ability to have impact and make a difference in our environment. And those three things combined is the definition of burnout. And so when we feel like that, we are in a great risk of burnout, which has been identified by the World Health Organization as a really critical workplace-induced health issue. And ultimately for our canary, if we're not paying attention to this decline in his well-being, he ends up dying. And so we start to see that. And while the studies are not universal, certainly some really disturbing studies coming out of some of the European countries that have been battling COVID in greater volumes and numbers in a much more ravaging state than in Australia, is that we're seeing suicide rates, we're seeing severe mental illness rates, we're seeing physical health manifestations of the stress induced by these things. So why is COVID having so much impact on our well-being in the health system in particular? We've always been prone to burnout in the health system because caring too much for too long and feeling like we've got too little control, fairly significant familiar features to us working in the complex health environment. But the impact of COVID, if you think about the three core pillars of well-being, there's lots of different ways of defining it, but I'm pretty simple, so three works for me. The first one is that sense of belonging and connection. Well, COVID has created social isolation for us. It's disconnected us from our teams, our workplaces, and so it's damaged that sense of belonging and connection. Secondly, the sense of competence has been affected because we don't know what we're doing. We're making it up as we go along, and that's the nature of a pandemic, and evolving and adjusting to what's going on. But in reality, it does shake our sense of confidence and our competence and whether we're doing a good job. And third, and this ability to, you know, the need to juggle business as usual as well as the emergence of all these new requirements, rolling out immunisation programs and getting gowned up and interacting with our consumers and clients and health other fellow health professionals in new ways and different ways. So that's been incredibly stressful. And then the third element, that sense of autonomy or control, when we don't get to choose where we socialise and when we go out, and we don't get to choose what we wear to work, and we've got to do all these other things like, you know, QR code scanning and having testing done and, you know, new rituals and practices that are imposed for the common good, there is a reduction in our sense of ability to have autonomy and control in our environment. And also a breakdown of our work-life boundaries with working from home and a whole range of things. So when you think about the core pillars of wellbeing being that sense of I fit in, I belong, I feel connected, I feel competent and able to do my job. And thirdly, I feel like I have autonomy and control. It's not surprising that COVID has had a significant impact on our wellbeing. So what can we do? My view is there's a lot more we can do than what we're currently doing as a health system. And to design for wellbeing, just three simple things. The first one is to pay attention. How do we know if our staff are well? The current health performance agreement requires us to measure two things about the wellbeing of our staff, or about our staff generally. One, have they had a performance review done in the last 6 months? And do they have excess leave? Neither of these answer the question, how are you coping? How are you? Are you okay? Do you have a sense of mastery, or are you feeling overwhelmed? So we're not paying attention as a system. Dan Ariely, the human human economist talks about what the evidence is really clear that if you want to change the behaviour of leaders, then you need to focus on measuring what matters. And so any measure that we hold a manager accountable to will influence their behaviour, because it's a natural human desire to want to achieve well against a standard that we're measured against. And so if as a system we're not routinely measuring the well-being of our staff, we're not holding our leaders accountable for the well-being of our staff, we've got no visibility of the trends that we assume are occurring through anecdote, but there is no impelling evidence, data, the hard data to say it, then I don't think we're paying attention. And what's the point of having a canary in the coal mine if you're not observing whether he's going from thriving to becoming laboured in his breathing? So paying attention is really important to pick up on early warning signs so that we can intervene. Secondly, stop blaming the canary. So if you send a canary into a coal mine and he doesn't come out because he becomes laboured in breathing and he dies, you don't say, stupid canary, you didn't work hard enough, you're not tough enough, you need to, learn better, do better. We don't blame the canary. We also acknowledge that actually the mine is dangerous. The air is toxic. There is something going on in that environment that's not okay. It's not viable for the life of that canary. And so let's stop blaming the canary and making this all about it being individuals not coping. We need to think about what's actually going on. Which brings me to my third point, addressing the underlying causes. So there are many causes of breakdown in wellbeing and burnout in health. There's my timer. I'm getting there, Janet. This is my last slide, I promise. The third and final thing in addressing the causes. So we know those causes can be individual in my mind, how I'm conceptualizing things, how I'm framing things, what I'm believing to be true. And if that's the problem, then coaching will help. Going to EAP, Employee Assistance Program, will help. If the problem is I don't have the skills to cope with the huge complexity and growing demands of my role, then maybe training might help. If I'm doing some behaviours that aren't healthy, then having people who can coach me and support me to put more boundaries in place or do things that would be more health promoting, that could help. But often it's the structure of the mine. Often it's the physical environment. It's the systems and processes, the burden of reporting, a range of things that our system as a bureaucratic system is demanding more and more accountabilities, more and more measures. And so those structural elements are having an impact. So how do we streamline, reduce red tape, simplify things, make it easier for people to do their jobs? And the fourth one, the toxic air, culture. What are the stories we tell? What are the beliefs we hold as a system about what is required and expected? And are those things reasonable? Are we continuing to throw more canaries down the coal mine? Because this third one, addressing the underlying causes, would be a bit like saying, oh gosh, some canaries have died. Well, put in some new ones. And this time we're going to have more robust canaries and we're going to send more in. And I think sometimes as a system, we're guilty of sending more and more fresh canaries in to replace the ones that aren't coping. And that's actually not okay either. And so how do we ensure that we are paying attention? We're not blaming the individual canary and that we're looking at the underlying causes, both in our culture and our structures and our systems, as well as some of those more individual elements about behaviours, knowledge and mindset. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tanya. I really enjoyed that analogy and the metaphor. This is a really tough subject, and I think we need to be focusing on it right now. And I think to put it across in that story makes such a difference. And, why do we keep throwing canaries in there? So, yeah, love that. That was really great. Thank you, Tanya. So now I would like to move to Rebecca. So again, Rebecca has an amazing history, which I will go through. So, like I said earlier, you're in the thick of it, Rebecca. You're managing teams within the health industry. You're also looking after yourself. So, there's a little bit of a bio. Rebecca has worked in healthcare for 37 years. You don't look old enough. And as an executive for over 15 years. Rebecca commenced with the former Country Health SA 10 years ago, starting as Executive Director of Mental Health, then into Chief Operating Officer, then to Interim Chief Exec Officer for Country Health, prior to being appointed as CEO of Barossa Hills Fleurieu. So initially beginning your year in nursing, your career in nursing, and worked across many disciplines. So again, so much knowledge. Thank you. Love your fun fact and I really want to play some music here. So to de-stress, Rebecca loves singing and dancing to ABBA. So if I could have ABBA playing in the background, we could have a bit of a demonstration there. So it's always good to look at ways that work for you that help de-stress. And I know we'll have a few examples later. So again, I'd love to hand over to you, Rebecca. So you've got your 10 minutes and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. That was a beautiful introduction. And it's always hard going after Tanya. That was magnificent, Tanya, and I love the analogy. And so here's a canary, and I'm very happy to tell you the story of this particular canary. Let me start by saying there's not a single person in Australia who hasn't thought differently about their mental health and well-being over the last year or so, and I'm certainly that's certainly been the case for myself. And I believe this has been felt even stronger in the health sector. You know, yet here in Australia, we're the lucky country, we've performed exceptionally well under COVID. And we've got better at so many things. There's so much to be proud of. You know, the telehealth initiatives, just for example, are just one of those. However, the downside is COVID, even in Australia, is going to have a really long tail. We're in for 3 to 5 years of impacts for COVID. And we know those impacts affect financial impacts, it's employment, it's the economy. And those changes are far-reaching into our communities. Similarly, I have also heard Australian leaders in mental health talking about unprecedented demand in presentations. And we're experiencing that too in our mental health services in rural and remote areas. Is that widening disadvantage that already exists. So vulnerable groups are doing it the toughest. And school retentions, poor, family violence, drug and alcohol issues are those things that we're seeing in our services coming in our front doors. We're also seeing huge presentations of young people. And that is new and that is different. So I've heard it described, I think even Tanya may have coined this phrase, I've heard it described as the third wave of COVID, and that is the mental health wave. And we in the health sector are not immune. We see it in our patients coming through the door, we see it amongst our family, and as a mother, a daughter and a grandmother, I can be absolutely sure that the impact of COVID in my personal and professional life has been profound within our friends as well and in our communities that we serve. And then I've seen it among my colleagues and I've seen it among my staff. So our story of Barossa Hills Fleurieu started as a brand new organisation almost 2 years ago when former Country Health was split into 6. And our organisation's inaugural year was borne witness to the most extraordinary dedication and resilience, and of our staff, of our communities, and we navigated the most complex and unprecedented set of circumstances. So starting off with the governance changes and all that brought through to the devastating bushfires of 2019-2020 summer season, affecting 2 large areas in our patch. Of course, Kangaroo Island being one, and Cuddly Creek in the hills here where I'm sitting today, Gamaraka being another. And then to be confronted by the global pandemic. We've actually had an incident management team stood up now for well over 15 months. So it's affected every facet in terms of COVID. It's impacted every facet of how we live, work, communicate and relate to each other. So my observations through this time is that as a health service, we've matured really rapidly. And it definitely has accelerated that coming together and that connectedness in that time. And we have simply continued to deliver the extraordinary. And whether that was about setting up COVID testing clinics, doing the vaccinations, whether it's about closing emergency departments to protect our nursing homes, whether it was around cancelling elective surgery. We just continued to pull rabbit out of the hat after rabbit out of the hat. And the one thing I'm most grateful for in this whole time is that we continued to run our own leadership and culture program within Barossa Hillsborough, of which Tanya's been an important part. And just when we felt we did not have a minute to spare, like not even a minute, we continued to invest in that time. And I believe it was a wise investment. And why? If someone was to ask me, I think personally it deepened our trust with one another, and allowed us to be vulnerable with one another too, which I think is so important. And it just improved the quality of our conversations. I tested my thinking, and I did a little dry run of this talk today with about 30 staff just prior up here at Gamaraka, and they were the resonance and engagement in the room and the nodding as I'm telling our story was really profound. So the impact, so what has been the impact? I'll tell you a story. I shared with our governing board at the end of last year. I like to give them a bit of context to the operating environment that we're in, and I try and do it via a story if I can. So the story I chose was the story of Sully. Now, some of you will know who Sully is. So he is the pilot that landed the plane in the Hudson River. There's also been a movie about it. And that is what it felt like. And just coincidentally, one of our board members was formerly a pilot and headed up Aviation Australia. So it was a interesting story to tell. And so what I explained to the board is this: we avoided a disaster. We haven't met our destination. We are going to get our feet wet. But there is one thing we absolutely have to do is get everyone off safely. And by the everyone, I was meaning that team I was talking to this morning. And it was about getting them off onto break, getting them some downtime. And we moved out everything of our agenda I could possibly think of. We moved it into February. And that was entirely deliberate strategy. So into 2021, we arrived. Staff came back from leave in a staggered way because we have to be mindful of bushfire season. And guess what? People didn't come back from leave refreshed. People came back from leave into a very uncertain environment and a very volatile environment. And then we had the ever increasing backlog of the business as usual, which we had not been able to attend to over the last 12 months or more, and had all that hanging over our head. Then, just when we thought that was tough, as every public health physician predicted around Australia, we had the rebound effect of the demand that we did not see last year. So our EDs became incredibly busy, people are attending sicker and more complex, and our EDs have become overwhelmed, and mental health being a component of that. Then we had to rapidly roll out vaccination. And then, as you will know through the media, we've had to change our approach to vaccinations, given some information around particular vaccines. So we stretched our workforce further and further and further. So unsurprisingly, again, my personal observations is staff are taking leave. They're taking planned and unplanned leave, quite often unexpected leave, and for longer durations. And I see personally a general level of exhaustion of people being tired and overwhelmed, and it concerns me. It concerns me deeply. And when I look beyond our patch across the whole system, I've never seen so much stress in the system, and people appearing to be just hanging in there. And, I have to say, that's a lot to hold as a leader. And I'm one of those leaders with quite an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. So for me, it's a lot. It is a lot. And so what is going on? And I totally support and understand Tanya's analogy. But how do we go from flourishing, what felt like flourishing, and extraordinary work results, to burnout? You know, how do we get from one to the other and so quickly? I'm a very big fan of Brene Brown, and I'm so privileged in my job. I get to drive a lot. And so I am often listening to podcasts and other materials. And this is not a term I would use personally. This is not my style, but the concept of friggin' first times, FFTs. We have had so many first times events that have occurred over the last 12 or more months. And you know, for us, all of those things I've mentioned, but also globally, what we've seen about, you know, extreme media reports around racism, around extreme politics. And then Brene at one point quoted David Eagleman. He's an American neuroscientist. And I hope I haven't oversimplified this, knowing Sue's about to come up, and this is obviously an area of expertise, but he confirmed that our brains can only adjust, problem solve, and react to our external and internal environments from personal and professional ways. We can only adjust so many times. Apparently, there is a limit to that neuroplasticity, that idea about the brain's ability to adjust. And so guess what happens when that brain has run out of that ability to continue to adjust? We get extreme fatigue. So it's a thing. I was so relieved to hear this. Can I say, like, I was so relieved to get out there and start learning and hearing a bit more about the evidence. So for us, the roadmap, I love the roadmap Tanya talked about. It's got to start with ourselves, and it's also got to be collective. We've got to have compassion for ourselves and others. We've got to take care of ourselves, not when we have time. We've got to take care of ourselves in a planned and prioritised way. And it gets down to that basics around the sleep, the exercise, the mindfulness, listening to ABBA or having the odd dance is a really important part of that too. The book by Sharon Weber I really love, and it's Show Up Hard. Don't be fooled by the title. It actually talks about being a compassionate witness, and that our vulnerability is our greatest strength. That book's been described as an antidote to burnout, so it's incredibly relevant. For those of us in a caring profession, it helps us to help others without ourselves getting lost in the process. And that brings me to my point, the point that Tanya raised about boundaries. And I think this is what I talked to my team about this morning, is how do we start creating those boundaries for us? Collectively is another story, and collectively I so want us to challenge the culture of health. And as a senior leader in health, I can tell you it's a highly extracting environment, and we are expected to know everything all of the time. And I believe it's time for us to challenge some of that. And guess what? We are the system. It's no one else. You know, it's all of us. And so how we bring that together becomes important. And the timing for that is right now, because of the pandemic, 2 years into governance reform in this state, and in a state that's also paid attention around cultural evolution. We have a plan that's described that. So this is a time to take advantage of that. There were two things I said to my team this morning, and I said that we can all do and must start doing right now. The first thing is to celebrate our achievements, every single achievement, no matter how small. The second thing, and my final comment, is we need to ensure that we are telling all of our staff their unique value to the organisation, to go and connect with your teams and tell each person what value they bring that no one else brings. It's critically important to build our resilience and wellbeing. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Rebecca. Some amazing points in there, and you've had so much, and not just you in your area, but you know, the local health networks have had so much thrown at them. You mentioned the bushfires, which we almost forgot about because of COVID. And these are things that we're having to adapt to instantly. They're not things that we're planning to change. This, you know, we've got to have that adaptability. So, you know, I love the fact that you mentioned about, you know, we're always pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Why do we do that? And, you know, moving on to looking at what Sue's going to say, I'm sure she might talk about how the brain works a little bit more. We keep putting ourselves in this position because we have to keep pulling rabbits out of the hat. So thank you. All right, Sue. So Sue will be our next speaker. It feels quite weird reading out her bio. It's a long time since I've done that. Sue is a keynote speaker, a global consultant, a positive leadership expert. She certainly specialises in practical application of neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and positive psych. And I think that's what's really important. We can all read a lot about these things, but how do we make it real? And I think this is where we're going to get into a little bit more depth about what can we do ourselves. So Sue is the founder or the CEO and founder of the Langley Group. She's taught thousands of business leaders, coaches, consultants how to create positive work cultures and harness the brain's potential. So as an academic director of the Langley Group Institute, Sue has created the first nationally, which I thought actually was globally, recognised diploma of positive psych and wellbeing. She has a master's in neuroscience of leadership and was a featured expert in the hit ABC TV series Redesign My Brain, if anyone saw that. That was with Todd Sampson. If you didn't, check it out. And in the award-winning documentary, Make Me a Leader. I've got lots of fun facts about Sue, but I'll try and keep it reasonable. I know when I was working with her, she used to play MC Hammer, Can't Touch This, before she went on stage. That was her song. Now I think it's moved into the Wonder Woman pose, and she does have a picture of Wonder Woman up there. But besides that, Sue absolutely practices what she preaches. If she talks about anything new, she will practice it. So I'll let you hear from Sue now. Welcome to the stage, Sue. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I'd forgotten MC Hammer, and I used to dance to it as well, Rebecca. All right, I know we only have a few minutes, so thank you. It's been fabulous listening to Tanya and Rebecca, and I'm going to pick up on a couple of those things. So what I wanted to talk about is everything we do at the Langley Group is based on the practical application of these three fields, as Janet said, the science of emotions and how we use them intelligently, the science of positive psychology, which is about human flourishing, whether it's as individuals, teams, or organizations, and also the neuroscience piece. And I love your comment, Rebecca, about the brain. And it's so lovely being on the panel here with Rebecca, because I haven't seen her, I think, since 2018. I think we established, and Tanya and I last worked together probably in 2019, so it's been a while. I just wanted to start with this quote, because I've been using this quote for a long time. Positive psychology, wonderful on the good days, essential on the bad. And for me, this is more important than ever during the pandemic, and particularly if we think about the healthcare sort of situation. Positive psychology isn't just, woohoo, let's all be happy, isn't it great? But it's about how do we continually to pull towards what's positive? How do we continually to move towards thriving, etc.? And guess what? We need those tools more than ever on the bad days, not necessarily on the good days. The good days, everything's going swimmingly. It's on the bad days we need them. So I thought I'd just highlight very briefly what is positive psychology, and then I'm going to try and link these things back to what Tanya and Rebecca were talking about. So if you think about what is well-being, what is positive psychology, I'd like you to imagine a line going in both directions with 0 in the middle, -10, +10. And for many, many years in psychology, we have looked at what's wrong with people. So for 100 years plus, we've gone, okay, if you're feeling a -3, you go and see a psychologist, a psychiatrist. Their job is to fix you, if you like, as in get you back to 0. In the medical profession, if you think about healthcare, what do? We feel unwell, we're a -5. We go and see a doctor, and their job is to alleviate what is wrong with us, which is awesome. Great, we get back to 0, woohoo. What positive psychology is about is, hang on, well, what does this side of the line look like? What does it look like if we are living life at a +5? If as a team, we are working at a +6, as an organization or a community, we are working at a +7. And what positive psychology has explored on an individual level and a team and a community level and a country level is, what's the science behind what does a +7, a +8, a +9 look like? What can we learn from that we can potentially bring into our own world? But I wanted to then also bring in Corey Keyes' sort of idea. So I like to put the science behind it. And I love that Tanya was putting the science behind it, even though she didn't tell you she was talking about self-determination theory. I love that she's putting the science behind it, because Corey Keyes then flipped it on its head and said, well, hang on, it's not just one line, because mental health creates a different dimension. And a lot of times people saw it as one, as in there's something wrong with you, as I said, and therefore you must have a mental illness, and therefore we've got got to fix you. But Corey Keyes, who himself has experienced quite a few mental health challenges, is a positive psychology researcher who went, well, hang on, let's look at 2 dimensions. And by creating this, he created 4 different quadrants. Now, his is a little bit more complex. I've simplified it down to 4. So if you look at these 4 quadrants, what you'll see is in the top right quadrant, you will see flourishing. That's what we can understand. We have high mental health, we're well-being, woohoo, we're flourishing. And Rebecca used this wonderful phrase, flourishing. This is when we are feeling at our best, if you like. We're thriving in life. We're operating at the original +7, +8, whatever it is. And if we then look at the bottom left, that's the languishing and mental illness. And again, this people can understand that I am not doing well and I have a mental illness. And most people can understand these 2 dimensions because, of course, they pretty much fit with the original one line. But Corey Keyes, by opening it up, created something else. And this is where I'm going to ask you to share something in chat for me. So in the bottom right-hand quadrant, what you can see there is flourishing and mental illness. I'd like to ask you to share with me in chat if you think it's possible to have a diagnosed mental illness and be flourishing. If you think it's possible, then share in chat yes or no. If you think it is possible, what is somebody doing? So if it's possible to be flourishing with a mental illness, yes, thank you. I hope it is, Kira, because I'm pretty sure there'll be some people on this call in that category. Okay, so brilliant. Many of you agree. Absolutely, yes. Fantastic. So now tell me, what does it look like? What is that person doing with a mental illness who is flourishing? Give me some ideas of what they're doing, because this is important. Many people seem to think that once you've got a mental illness, oh, that's it. But actually, okay, brilliant. We've got mindfulness. Thanks, Beck. Support. Excellent, Heather. So generally speaking, people around you know, and there's a support system in place. Maybe medication. Excellent. Managing in a safe way, a healthy way, eating well, physically moving. Excellent. Tapping into their toolkit. Brilliant. Social connection is a common theme I can see coming through here. Growth mindset. Brilliant. Running a hospital show. I'm not entirely sure that's always the case, but I like to think so. Yeah, so it's more than surviving. We are actually talking flourishing here. So I want you to understand that somebody in that quadrant is not languishing and hiding it. That's not what we're talking about here. They are managing it through eat, sleep, exercise, maybe medication, social support, other activities such as journaling, mindfulness, whatever it happens to be, taking breaks, looking after their mental health, even with a diagnosed mental illness. Brilliant. And the important thing about this, and I know one of my good friends, she says, absolutely, I'm in that category. She said, I exercise every day, and on bad days, I exercise twice. She does 101 different things to look after herself, but she knows that's the space that she's in. Okay, so when Corey Keyes opened up this category, well, guess what? He then opened up the opposite quadrant, the top left-hand quadrant. So this is high mental health. There's nothing mentally, if you like, wrong with us. We don't experience any mental health challenges, and yet we have low well-being. And this is what they call the languishing quadrant. Languishing, share with me in chat, actually, if you like. What do you think this looks like? If I am languishing, but there's no mental illness, what's going on for me? So just share some ideas in chat. Low mood, brilliant. Meh. Thanks, Tanya. Low motivation, low energy, excellent. Depression potentially, but not so I've dropped in yet, Nick. So we haven't dropped down into mental illness yet. Negativity. Okay, James, I'm coming back to your phase of life. Uninspired. Netflix and chippies. Lisa, you are spot on. I saw your name on here. It's good to have you on. Tiredness, not engaged, pessimism, presenteeism, going through the motions, blah, blah. In the right job? Possibly not. Excellent. So think about this, and I'm not judging anybody in the languishing quadrant, because again, I'm pretty sure some of us on this call will be in the languishing quadrant on and off, maybe more on than off right now. Languishing could be presenteeism, absenteeism, calling in sick, not looking after yourself, absolutely Netflix and chippies. So not eating well, not exercising, as I say, binge watching Netflix, doing things that are not great for your well-being, etc., etc., etc. Now, they could be, and to James's point, to a particular phase in life. If you have just lost somebody close to you and you're grieving, you might well be in the languishing quadrant. To Rebecca's point, if you are feeling overwhelmed with things at work and you are not taking care of yourself, you are possibly languishing. If we go back to Tanya's wonderful canary analogy, well, we can see our canary kind of falling across, can't we? Sort of drifting from flourishing to languishing and then potentially dropping completely down into the bottom left-hand quadrant. Now, the important thing that I want you to consider here is every single one of us have the possibility of being in any one of those quadrants. And I'm going to give you an example. Early on in our lockdown, and I'm with Rebecca here, I think Australia has handled things amazingly compared to the rest of the world. But I remember early in lockdown, I absolutely chose to walk over to the languishing quadrant. I said to my husband, that's it, I need chocolate, pizza, and alcohol. And it's like, I'm going to have an evening in the languishing quadrant. What's really important to understand is we will all be in that languishing quadrant at some point. One thing I'd like to share with you with regard to the research is even before COVID in 2019, there were a higher proportion of people in the workplace in the languishing quadrant than in the flourishing quadrant. And actually the mental illness was relatively low. If we think about mental health first aid, what is that? That's about catching people when they fall or before they fall, hopefully. So we're putting some little barriers in place and we're trying to catch people. Where I like to spend my time, if we go to the next slide, is how do we put tools in the toolkit so that people can stay more frequently in flourishing, whether they've got a mental illness or whether they haven't. And to Tanya's point, this is partly about giving the canary tools to go, hang on, I need a break. I need to fly out of the mind for a bit. Thanks very much. I need to look after myself. But it's also about how do we work together as an organization. And I know I've only got about 1 minute left, so I just want to highlight, and one of my colleagues, Scott, is also on the call based in Adelaide. We've worked with a number of healthcare organizations, literally all of these in the last 12 months. And one of the things that I love is, yes, working with leaders and helping put tools in their toolkit, working with individuals and helping put tools in their toolkit so they can stay flourishing as more frequently as possible. But one of the things that works really well, to Rebecca's point, is how do you change also the system? And it's what's known as systems-informed positive psychology, which is getting the team together to say, okay, what are we awesome at, to Rebecca's point, and then what can we do to continue to pull towards that so that the system is supporting the canaries. And the mind is no longer clogging up the lungs. It's actually a mind that is clear and open and free and fresh, where people can show up and do their best. So it's about putting tools in the toolkit for the canary, and it's about improving the mind. So I know I haven't got any more time to talk anymore, so I will throw back to you, Janet, for our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Sue. Again, really interesting to see how we can turn some of these things around. Certainly, I love the practical application, really putting the research, in place, and what we can do as individuals and what we can seek to do as an organisation. So now I would encourage you all to put through your questions in the Q&A. We do already have a couple, or more than a couple actually. So I want to talk about soldiering on. And I touched on this point earlier on, and I know all three of you have touched on this. Why do we keep soldiering on? Why is it that we perhaps don't notice our early signs individually, and perhaps why do our leaders not notice those early signs? How can we stop that canary going back in if it's starting to get sooty? So I don't know whether, Tanya, you want to touch on that first, but I know, Sue, you'll have some comments on that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure Sue's much better qualified than me to answer this one, but I know, why do I soldier on? Particularly, 23 years in health, the why for me is because I actually really care about the work I do and the people I serve and the communities in particular. And so I think that's true of most of us who work in healthcare, is that we do it because we want to make a difference. We do it because we care about the work we do. And so the soldiering on is kind of just what you do. You suck it up and you carry on. And I also think there is a dark side to that, in that it doesn't take much if we're soldiering on for too long and caring too much for too long, that we can dip into not noticing when we're putting our own needs too far back on our priority list in service of others. And so this sense of, you know, and I know Mary Free is on the call, this sense of compassion without self-compassion is actually not great compassion. And so I think there's a lot of cultural norms that drive us to keep pushing ourselves beyond what is reasonable.
Thank you, Tanya. And I'm going to go to Rebecca first. Sorry, Sue. How can we help people from an organisational perspective? I'm sure you're seeing this all the time and you can see that people are soldiering on. From a leadership perspective, how can we help them recognise that this is what's happening if people aren't aware themselves?
Apologies, sorry, I just had someone walk through. So from the thing that we can do is absolutely have the conversations. And I think the first thing is just recognising there's a role modelling thing here too. You know, we do all love what we do, but it's actually recognising the impacts of the soldiering on and having those conversations being said. And recognising as well, you know, healthcare work is altruistic work. We are here for our communities, but recognising that we can't do good jobs if we're continuing to soldier on. So what are the early warning signs and how do we give ourselves permission to put those boundaries around?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to go straight to you, Sue. What about, why does the brain keep us doing this? And what can we notice about ourselves to stop ourselves keep doing this when it's becoming detrimental?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I'm going to pick up on what Tanya was talking about because I do like to put the science behind it. Is well, for a start, why do we keep soldiering on? Well, I guess it's better than the alternative of being dead on the battlefield. So we probably keep getting ourselves up for that reason. But if you think about one of the underlying components of stress, and I haven't got time to go into all the brain stuff, but one of the key elements of stress that we know is why people get stressed is because they care. Now think about that for a moment. You would not get stressed if you didn't care about something. Whether you get stressed because of your kids, well, hopefully you care about your kids. You get stressed at work because you care about your work. So that's one of the key components of stress is actually we care. If we didn't care, we wouldn't get stressed. Now, I'm not suggesting you all start stopping caring, no longer care. But the other thing is, and it links to what both Tanya and Rebecca said about the caring sort of professions, we often talk about compassion fatigue, and we really shouldn't, because it's not compassion fatigue, it's empathy fatigue. Empathy is when you are taking on other people's emotions and you are feeling it as if they're your own. And to your point, Janet, then sometimes we don't always have the skills. It's a science of interoception, basically looking within our body and noticing and hearing the data that's being sent to us, if you like, of how we're feeling. And if we're not doing that, we can take on all of this stuff. Sometimes by helping people understand how emotions work and really understand the distinction between empathy and compassion, because actually compassion from a neuroscience perspective is very, very different to empathy. Empathy is limbic system and we get drained by it because we feel what other people are feeling. Compassion is limbic system and prefrontal cortex, which means it's much more sustainable to have compassion for people. So we've been getting that a little bit wrong. So that's something that I think is really useful to teach people. And I think what happens is people soldier on, if we use that term, without actually listening to the data that their body is telling them that says, hang on, I'm the canary in the coal mine. It's time for me to go to sleep. It's time for me to look after myself. And it is a very altruistic profession, but I think it's misplaced because all the research tells us that when you are in a better place, you are able to be more kind, more collaborative, more supportive, more altruistic. So if you're not looking after you, you're actually not able to do your job as effectively.
Great answer. Thank you. We do need to look after ourselves. It goes back to the aircraft, doesn't it? Putting on your mask first. So that's great. Okay, so there's lots of questions here. I'm going to read out one that's quite different. So interesting to see the way the canary metaphor was played out during COVID. So thinking about distribution of adequate PPE to healthcare workers. So again, quite a different stance here. Rebecca, I might throw to you first on this one. What's your thinking around distribution of PPE and how that helps or hinders our people?
I think this goes to the comment that was made earlier, about, the requirement for PPE and everything that goes with that. It dramatically changed what we did. The shortage of supply that we had around PPE around Australia, given most of the offshore manufacturers, was a very hard part of COVID. And for us to be managing continuously community expectations and what we needed to do to keep ourselves safe, particularly with some of the pictures that we were seeing around the globe of the fear about what was going to happen in this pandemic. So that was a very difficult time for us. And the recognition, in terms of PPE now, it has become essentially a part of everything that we do. And however, it does fundamentally change the way that our staff can operate, and that brings its hindrances, particularly as we've found, in hotter conditions and those types of things as well, which needs to also be understood.
Excellent. Thanks, Rebecca. And I totally hear your words there. Does anyone else want to add on to that? I know we haven't got too much time left, so I want to make sure we get a few more questions in. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so I just had another question here. If you, and I'll go to each of you for this, if you had one opportunity and budget was no issue, what's one thing that you would do to help your people, your healthcare workers now? I don't know who wants to go first on that one. So you've come off mute, so maybe you go.
Well, it's probably not for me to say with regard to obviously my healthcare workers, but the key thing is, and this is the same for everything for me, the desire to understand and have well-being. There's a huge desire around well-being. People want to flourish, they want to do those things. But the thing that I've noticed more than anything is actually the knowledge is pretty low about what to do. And I have a saying I've said for many, many years is treat yourself as a scientific experiment, as in put the science into practice. You know it, do you do it? So many people sort of know stuff, but they don't do it. And I think that's the key thing for me is, one, you've got to make this knowledge available and give people the opportunity as a team or a system or an individual to understand it. But then you've got to give the space for people to do it, and also taking responsibility. And I just want to come back to Tiny's point about the canary and the canary and the mine. I had a gentleman the other day, a government organisation, who said to me, "Oh, our organisation should just turn our emails off at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, Thursday, and then 4 o'clock on Friday, and not turn them on again till Monday." And this is a senior leader of an organisation. And I very politely told him to be an adult. He has the capacity to turn his own emails off at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think there's a bit of a balance of those sorts of things, that we're not children. We can actually do some of these things. Sorry, Tanya, over to you.
Thanks. So I think what I'm really passionate about is how do you create workplaces and systems that keep people well and that enable them to do their work well. And so my bias is towards the collective space because I see too much of individuals having that overworked sense of care that turns into martyrdom and the damage it causes them and the people around them. And so I think there's one thing for me that would make a big difference. It's, based on that Dan Ariely quote I mentioned before, that if what we measure makes a difference to where our system puts its attention. And so I would be, if I had, all the money in the world, or probably doesn't need that much money, I would be investing in an ability to measure real time, not, and I work for SA Survey that's months and months late by the time you get it, and it doesn't tell you anything, but stuff that puts the knowledge in the hands of the people that can make a difference in the moment. And so think about what it takes to change organisations. Health is huge. It's a complex system and, with deeply entrenched cultures. But what we know is the system is the people. And so for me, I would be investing in an ability to measure real time so that teams can be having the conversations about how you're going with a trigger for for a deeper conversation and an exploration about what is it that's contributing to our struggle right now. What of that can we control personally in our thinking? What supports might help with that? What can we control in our behaviours, and what supports might help with that? What can we do to our systems and processes and ways of working that would make a difference? And to me, that's an ongoing conversation, but we must put the tools in the hands of the people as close to the coalface, pardon the extension of the pun, but as close to the coalface as we possibly can, so that we can design bottom-up ways of improving the situations that we operate in.
Excellent. Thank you, Tanya. That's a great segue into Teamgage, but it's not about Teamgage. And I would really want to hear from Rebecca from a CEO perspective as to what's one thing that you would do for your team or your area.
I would like to see that we reward people who are able to manage boundaries and manage balance, so it becomes a rewarding thing. And I'd like to see a revolution around that across our system. And I want a bit of everything that Sue and Tanya said too. But we definitely need to change our mindset about what good leadership and role modelling is about.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. That brings us to the end of our webinar. I'm disappointed to say, because there's definitely some more questions. So as I mentioned before, we will answer those questions for you. But I also would like to challenge you all as an audience to think about one thing that you're going to do differently, either to help yourself and your well-being or to help your team and your well-being. And it'd be great if you shared that later on down the track, but that's my challenge to you. The other thing is, I'm honoured to support this webinar. I appreciate you all joining. I would love to do this again sometime. So I just want to say thank you to our audience. Thank you so much to our speakers. More importantly, go out there, enjoy the rest of the day. Think about how you could be in that flourishing segment, and come back to us with any questions that you may have. So thank you so much. Thank you to Sue, to Rebecca, and to Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Lovely
Beautifully
to
done, Janet.
Bye, everyone.